Dear participants, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. It's one of several webinars of this kind that we have organized in the context of the master's program in international relations and Eastern Mediterranean studies of the Department of Politics and Governance at the University of Nicosia. The program in the master's program in international relations and Eastern Mediterranean studies, if I may start with this, which I have been coordinating since its inception in 2021. My name is Michalis Kondos. I should have introduced myself first. I am Associate Professor at the Department of Politics and Governance, and I'm the coordinator of the Master's Program in International Relations and Eastern Mediterranean Studies, which is a unique Master's Program of its kind in the sense that it is the only one that combines these two areas of expertise, international relations and Eastern Mediterranean Studies, delving into both in a manner that combines both empirical and theoretical aspects. The program is offered exclusively in online form, which makes it compatible and accessible for every eligible person, regardless the geographic position. And it is offered both in English and Greek. It comprises of 90 ECTS, namely 6 core courses plus 3 electives, or 1 elective plus a master's thesis. It can be completed either in 1.5 years or in 1 year plus a summer period, assuming that someone is admitted in the fall semester and chooses to take the master thesis option at the end of year of his studies. It is offered both on a part-time or on a full-time basis, so a student can organize her or his studies on a part-time basis, assuming that she or he will complete in 8 semesters. In that sense, you can take 1 or 2 courses per semester, or you can take the full load of 3 courses, which is the maximum eligible load per semester. You can have a look at the program's details, the content of the program, the admissions requirements, the career prospects. Let me just note that this particular program has been pretty much popular among students with professional background related with the diplomatic corps, the services of ministries of foreign affairs, and services of ministries of defense, as well as security bodies. So, but of course, it's not limited to these professional backgrounds. It is also pretty much useful for journalists, for professionals in political institutions or research institutions dealing with security, diplomacy, or broadly international relations affairs. Now that was an introduction by myself on the program. We can now start with the main theme of our webinar today, which is titled Disruptive Technologies in a Changing Security Environment, the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. Let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Petros Petrikos, who is a joint faculty member at the Department of Politics and Governance. Good evening, Petros. Very nice to having you with us today.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Konstantinos Adamides, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Politics and Governance. Good evening, Konstantinos.
Good evening. Thank you, Mihaly. Thank you, Petros, for taking care of this, and thank you all for joining us. We look forward to a very interesting discussion.
Let me now introduce you to the structure of the webinar. First, we're going to have a 20 minutes presentation by Petros. Petros is going to deal with the following research question: taking regional challenges in the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean into consideration. How do strategic and intelligence priorities tackle hybrid threats? Let me just add that Petros is an expert on hybrid security, hybrid warfare, and particularly hybrid threats. After that, Konstantinos is going to discuss the main points of Petros's presentation. And at the end, we will have around 25 minutes for a Q&A session, for an open discussion. We will open the floor, and everybody will be able to post questions via the chat application of our platform. We are receiving questions exclusively via the chat and not via the microphone. Therefore, all microphones except for the microphone of the speaker must be shut down. Now, I guess we can start. Petros, the floor is yours. You can share your presentation if you have any with us.
Great.
And
thank you very much.
Please choose to share your entire screen, not just your PowerPoint file. That would work much better, as I was informed.
Brilliant. Can you see my presentation now?
Yeah, clearly. Thank you.
And it's full screen?
It is, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank you all for attending today. Thank you both to Mihalis and Konstantinos for joining the conversation. The topic in question is very timely, and at the same time, it's very challenging, not just in a theoretical way, but also when it comes to policy and real policy application. So what I'd like to do is just to start with a short introduction on what disruptive technologies and what hybrid threats specifically refer to. And both as terms, they're very contested, both in the literature, but also, as I've mentioned, in actual application when it comes to drafting policy, strategizing, or in general, trying to make sense of the complexities of the environment that we're talking about. And specifically, both the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea face unprecedented challenges, but not just in the contemporary sense, but also historically. So what are disruptive technologies? In general, we're talking about a variety of technologies that are innovative in nature. This includes artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and advanced materials. And the gist of it is that when we're talking about disruptive technologies from a security context, all these threats, all these technologies, they fundamentally alter the way we understand, the way we formulate policy over defense, intelligence, or national security, and how we approach conflict itself. It's essentially the involvement, the creation, if you like, of new military advantages in the quest in pursuit of improving decision making, and at the same time enabling new tactics like the use of autonomous drones, um, or more automated devices in both the conflict, during a conflict, but at the same time for defensive purposes as defensive techniques. While they bring about a lot of merits when it comes to defense and security, they also pose significant risks because the fact that technology itself is fast moving forward. It's not just on the defensive side, but an adversary can also be in possession of such technology. So the potential of advanced bioweapons emerging or new threats in both the cyberspace and also in aerospace in general, that's a higher risk, not just for governments and institutions, but also for societies. So what I'd like to also include as part of our introduction to this topic is the issue of these disruptive technologies. A significant challenge is the attempts that such technologies try to make use of vulnerabilities in society in an effort to manipulate norms, emotions, or the identity of a given target. And that could be societies with fragile sets of identities. It could be societies that are already experiencing conflict, any kind of conflict. It could be intercommunal conflict. It could be on a regional level or on a national level. So the fragmentation of society can bring about chaos and distrust, not just distrust among individuals and within communities, but also towards institutions, towards the very foundations that are there, at least in theory, to protect the citizenry. And hybrid threats that make use of all the above. They essentially blur conventional and unconventional means of warfare. Now, hybrid threats, I'm not going to be getting into a great detail when it comes to the literature on this topic, but the gist of it again is that they essentially involve tools and the means through which an adversary can engage in warfare through both conventional and unconventional means. So through both the traditional military sense, but also through more technologically advanced and other methods, including disinformation. So we will be examining this, and I will also invite at the later stage the rest of the panel and, of course, the audience to comment on what these threats essentially are from your perspective. Now, hybridity essentially also challenges traditional international relations distinctions. So that's more on the theoretical context, in the theoretical sense. But for us as scholars, it means it becomes much harder when it comes to producing knowledge on the one hand, and on the other hand, informing the policymaker, the respective policymaker, on the appropriate means through which they can enact policy to effectively secure societies and defend institutions and countries. So a key question, and this is linked to the main question that Michalis initiated this conversation: how do strategy and intelligence priorities respond? That's what I seek to explore today through this short intervention. And this is relevant to various cases that we're going to be looking at, including Ukraine, Syria, Gaza, but also non-state actors such as the Islamic State. So it has some comparable elements when we're looking at both the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. When I'm referring to conflict regions, I like to think of pieces on a chessboard. So how does this chessboard look like? Just a quick glance over both regions. We are dealing with persistent conflict zones and contested sovereignty in both areas. We have unstable security baselines, and we have the involvement of third countries and foreign actors that are not necessarily part of the region, but they have a vested interest, and that is to influence and shape the strategic priorities of the region in order to advance their own interests. For example, China and the Belt and Road Initiative that exerts financial influence. Russia and Ukraine, which is much more prominent, and also it makes much more sense from a conventional perspective. The conflict in Gaza, and with Israel, and also the involvement of Iran. Turkey and the case of Cyprus, and there are there are other cases that are historically have developed in these regions. In general, conflict is persistent and it typically involves contested sovereignty. And that's on the more traditional side. Now, on the geopolitical competition side, we have additional actors that have emerged in recent years. We have the European Union striving to be a global actor and an effective security provider, both for its member states, but also for areas beyond, outside its own, supposed territory. I mean, the EU does not have a defined geographic territory in itself. We also have Russia, and Turkey, who we can also be described as revisionist powers. And we have also the United States, who initially had long-lasting interest, historically, at least in the region. But the question there is, are there any shifting interests when it comes to the United States? Is the United States, and this is based on recent remarks, recent statements, is it shifting towards different geopolitical areas? Is it focusing more on China, for example, nowadays? There are overlapping military postures and strategic friction among these geopolitical players, and also shifting interests. There's also a high density of non-state armed groups. This includes paramilitary organizations, private military companies, terrorist organizations as well, such as the Islamic State, as I've mentioned earlier, particularly in Syria now, with the change of with the fall of the Assad regime and al-Shara's rise to power. So these armed groups, who are non-state actors, or potentially they might be backed by state players, they often become more technologically adaptive to the changing landscape, and they're supported sometimes by external patrons. And this contributes the attribution and the escalation of the conflict. And by attribution, I mean who is actually responsible for waging war. It cannot be easily, well, although we can make the connection. The attribution is both a political and also a legal problem, and this is something that we also see with hybrid threats. Merely influencing an audience, for example, and feeding it fake news and malign information in such a way that is to inhibit its own resilience and growth as a population, as a society, does not necessarily constitute an act of war. But this is where perhaps we should redraw our interpretations when it comes to law, and what essentially how warfare itself has transformed. So these are for your consideration as well. Now, there are also maritime disputes in both seas, in both areas, and also energy competition, including offshore gas exploration. In the Eastern Mediterranean particularly, we have disagreements over the boundary of the maritime boundary and the delimitation of the exclusive economic zone of certain countries. There is the example of Turkey, for instance, not recognizing the exclusive economic zone of island states. And that's a problem, particularly for countries like Cyprus, who are also at the moment in an open confrontation and conflict with countries like Turkey, who are bigger in the material sense, and they possess more hard security and defense considerations. So this establishes vulnerable maritime corridors in these examples. Critical infrastructure was very important from a hybrid threat perspective, because critical infrastructure, which includes clean access, clean water supply, transportation, the institutions of healthcare, communications, telecommunications, and so on. They are the key sectors that a country, a society, and a state need to function on a day-to-day basis. So when these when this infrastructure is disrupted, well, anxieties emerge and uncertainties are spread through society. So, for example, the cutting of underwater cables, which establishes communication from one country to another by an adversary, this actually can spread on a very fast pace. It can create other geopolitical realities and other security considerations. So these also includes energy platforms, port facilities. So these are all increasingly targeted in hybrid activities and operations. There's also the proliferation of disruptive technologies, which allows actors to leverage drones, cyber tools, and also precision capabilities in low cost and high impact ways. And finally, I'd like to include an existential consideration for this. There are ontological security pressures on states themselves. We're talking about recurring crises historically, and also the technological disruption, essentially, that is yielded challenges the states themselves' sense of stability and continuity. And this prompts more assertive security behaviors as a response. A quick look at the Black Sea security environment. We are predominantly dealing and talking nowadays about the impact of Russia's invasion on Ukraine and the conflict itself, which has technologically adapted to these new challenges that I've mentioned. Russia itself has now employed a blockade in the Black Sea, but also beyond. We have seen in recent months and weeks, even more recently in the case of Belgium, we've seen drones, for example, appearing in the airspace, in the FIR of other countries, and that creates a real problem. But specifically, since we're talking about the Black Sea, it shows to a good extent Putin's own defiance of international law. Can this, when we're talking about the chessboard, can this be considered a checkmate? That's a question for us to reflect on. I wouldn't say it is a checkmate, however, because we see that countries are strongly cooperating to address challenges as such. We haven't seen any concrete actions on the EU side at the moment. That's a critique, although the EU is very much aware of the situation because it's essentially happening at its own backyard. We need to see more action in terms of hard security considerations. So the drones, the electronic warfare, the cyber tools that I've mentioned, they all play a role in regional competition. And again, we also see maritime vulnerabilities, things that I've already mentioned in terms of critical infrastructure. And this poses an intelligence challenge as well. To the extent that we should be attributing these attacks to covert or proxy actions. Now, when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean itself, again, more complex conflicts. We have Syria, we have Gaza, we have regional
rivals. Sorry to interrupt you. Let me just inform you that we have 2 or 3 more minutes to go.
Perfect. Thank you. So I will just go through this slide in a bit more quickly, and then we can go back for any additional discussion. So again, we see similar things. That's essentially the point that I was trying to make. And security contestation over energy and maritime boundaries is also prevalent. Is this from the Turkish side another checkmate? Again, what can be done in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is where we are also located? How can states respond using technology responses, using signal intelligence, counter drone systems like Cyprus has employed, cyber resilience education, but also hybrid activity in general includes information operations. And this is another thing that we constantly have to account for. Now, the role of national security in general is about interpreting regional power to assess how states integrate disruptive technologies into broader political and military strategies. evaluating the escalation and be aware of miscalculation, identifying covert influence channels, mapping non-state actor technological adaptation, and using tech-driven activities and essentially countering hybrid activities in order to avoid any impact on societal resilience. So we need a long horizon assessment on emerging technologies as such, and to exercise better governance. In general, we have to focus on anticipatory intelligence and early warning programs by exchanging intelligence with allies. From a national security perspective, that's very important. Making use of technological advances to improve our own infrastructure, and focusing on the emotional dimension of the conflict to improve and protect societal resilience. And this is linked to ontological security, how to effectively manage internal anxieties in order to prevent any further escalation of the impact of the conflict itself. Now, some conclusions, and I apologize for quickly rushing into this, but we need to establish regional cooperation and to provide shared assessments. On an EU level, this is already done with platforms such as EU INSEN. That's something that the European Union is working towards. That's the Intelligence Center of the European Union. We need to address both state and non-state technological adoption and their own capabilities. We also need to enhance deterrence capabilities through intelligence sharing and joint exercises, both security and military exercises. And we have to be aware because hybrid threats and the rise of technology remain persistent. This is not going to change. We're only going to move towards an even worse direction if we do not account for these changes. So strategic frameworks as such must evolve to remain effective. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Petros. That was a very interesting and very well articulated presentation on such a challenging, timely, and I would call it hot, super hot topic. I do have already questions myself, but unfortunately for the time being, at least I cannot make them. I will now give the floor to our discussant, Dr. Konstantinos Adamidis, for his own intervention. Konstantino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Petros. Thank you, Michalis. Well, obviously, it's impossible to discuss everything that was said and kind of counterproductive. So I will try to focus on some of the things that Petros said, and I'm just doing it on the fly. So you have to forgive me if I miss something. But I want to drive a few points across that I think are very, very important that Petros raised. And the first one is we need to understand that disruptive technologies are not just new tools. They shape the way we understand defense, intelligence, and even conflict themselves. And we've seen how Petros, pose those questions and ask, if this is checkmate or not. So what they do, what disruptive technologies do, and these two areas, the Black Sea region and the East Med, are good to test this hypothesis. So what they do is they reshape decision-making cycles, decision-making frameworks. They generate new military advantages. And more importantly, what they do, and this is where we need to pay a lot of attention, is that they blur the boundaries between the conventional and the hybrid domains. And this is again something that Petros brought up. And of course, they increase the risks, with distrust, chaos, disinformation, cognitive warfare, and the likes. So that's the first part, this blurriness and this new way of looking and understanding defense technology and even conflicts. The second is the hybridity aspect of things that seems to be becoming the new normal. We see how even NATO is changing its approach to things and what is considered to be normal and what is considered to be different. We can discuss this later. So, and this is a challenge for the classic international relations distinctions in today's security environment. This hybridity challenges the classic IR distinctions, the concept between war and peace, this blurriness, the importance of state and non-state, and very correctly Petros pointed out the importance to analyze and tackle and understand the technological adaptation of non-state actors. And of course, the third variable in this today's security environment is the physical versus the digital. And this will only become more important with the integration of AI technology in the field, which is across the board. It's not just in one area specifically. And what disruptive technologies do is they amplify the hybridity because it allows actors to weaponize so many things, including information. So it's not just drones, which is of course very important, as Petros noted, but information as well. And this creates many, many important questions, not only for the intelligence services, but for the people themselves, especially within the framework of cognitive warfare and how we actually process the analysis of developments. Now, within the region, I think Petros posed one question that was not discussed in depth, and of course it wasn't possible to discuss everything in depth in just 20 minutes. But given what is going on in the East Med and the Black Sea, the persistent conflicts that contest the sovereignty, all of this, the region's powers, all of these things that Petros mentioned, he also mentioned the EU and its struggle, the EU struggle to become a geopolitical actor. And I think this is something that we really need to keep in mind. Can the EU be a geopolitical actor? And it's a big question mark. My personal opinion is that at this point in time, it cannot, not a major one. It lacks the technology, it lacks the cohesiveness within the EU, it lacks the willingness to get involved, and of course it lacks the hard power as a unit. So it's very hard to be a geopolitical actor when all of these things that Petros mentioned are taking place in the region. What else? Some other things that I think are worth considering when we talk about disruptive technologies is that, especially with the use of AI, we will see a shift from a question of quantity to a question of quality, capability quality specifically. So essentially, the strategic advantages will not necessarily be on who has more weapons or the, but rather who has the best precision, speed, autonomy, right? Like autonomous drones, for instance. So how we should consider this disruptive technology, especially artificial intelligence, is that it is a force multiplier. So essentially what it does, it rather upgrades existing systems across domains, whether it's space or cyber or air force, including drones, rather than necessarily creating new class of weapons, which could of course create new class of weapons, but more importantly, it multiplies and upgrades the existing ones. And this essentially, and I'm going to close with this because I want to leave time for questions, but I want to think more in terms of disruptive technology. We should think of the cognitive advantages that this creates. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the focus moves from physical destruction to faster thinking and decision making. That's where the challenge will be. So the arms races will not be in a single area. It will be competition across the board. It will be interconnected. It will be multi-domain, not in isolated contested areas. So this will create other problems that we need to consider. And again, these regions help us see that. What it will create is a consolidation of the US and China domain in the field of AI and other disruptive technologies. But at the same time, this will create issues and debates such as authoritarian efficiency, like the way China is using these technologies, as opposed to democratic openness, which is how the Europe and the US would like to use these technologies. So I think these are issues that we need to consider. And of course, the fact that such technologies essentially shape or reshape the global security geography. The power projection is different now. Remote warfare, deep strikes, the ability to protect in a distance becomes much more difficult. The competition is less linked to physical borders and more to digital infrastructure and technological sovereignty and supply chains, whether it's microchips or other things. So all of these things are extremely important, and we see them in this region. We've seen how important it is for Ukraine to maintain the supply chain as it is, of course, for Russia. And of course, the same applies for Israel in the case, in its two-year wars. So I'm going to stop here with these thoughts and thank Petros again for his very interesting discussion, and we're open to questions.
Both. I have one question. I mean, I have received already one question, two questions, one question and one comment. Let me start with the question by Kostas. Good evening. How can states make use of artificial intelligence to timely identify threats to their security without undermining the protection of their citizens' personal data? I think this goes primarily to Petros, but also Konstantinos has, of course, the expertise to answer. And another comment that I already have by Mrs. Maria Papadopoulou. I would say that it's not only the EU identity of the states that are EU members. It's also the NATO identity, which probably complicates the role and the decisions and leads mostly to the soft power that EU mostly use. Would you like to start with the first round of comments on these two questions? One question, one comment. Petros?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question, particularly because I don't think there's at the moment a balance when it comes to effectively making use of artificial intelligence to predict, speculate. I mean, at the moment, artificial intelligence, and I'm talking about primarily within security structures, it's used for effectively for surveillance, of course, to inspect borders. So essentially to inspect hard security considerations and threats. Now, when it comes to the interpretive role that the AI has on anticipating threats and predicting any kind of dangers that might emanate due to hostile movements, potentially, for example, across a border. I mean, I think the example of Russia speaks volumes on its own, how the extent to which it was pretty much everyone had the using technologies as well that were surveillance technologies in nature across the border of Ukraine. Such technologies were employed in order to essentially study and understand why the Russians, for example, were moving. Why were they mobilizing closer to the border? And I think a couple of security agencies picked this up, like, for example, the Estonian intelligence, the foreign intelligence of Estonia, EFIS, actually published in a national report that what they see is very concerning, and that this is within a few weeks we're likely to go to war. as Europeans against an existential threat that is Russia. Now, this was actually an analytical remark, in the sense that this event was studied primarily with the naked eye, and this, of course, through the exchange of intelligence. No AI technology was used to actually put that report together, other than potentially generative AI. Of course, I cannot be 100% certain in that remark, but there is discussions taking place how to regulate AI at the moment. It's not that we are reaching a dead end, but it's very difficult, very challenging at the moment to come up with a regulation that will effectively, on the one hand, protect citizens 100%, and then on the other hand, it will give us the hard security considerations that we want. We're trying to reach that balance, but I don't know the extent to which we are there yet. I think that's kind of the situation that we're in. And just a quick comment on the question on the NATO identity. NATO itself, on paper, also is supposedly, at the moment, the EU's security provider. This is actually mentioned in the Treaty of the EU as well. And the challenge there is to avoid any duplication from the EU security structures, so that no security structure is going to replicate what NATO is already doing. And NATO and the EU security mechanism should cooperate in order to achieve and this is not quoting per se, but this is in theory long-lasting security for the whole of Europe. We do see changes in the way that the EU operates now. We've seen newer policy emerging, such as the strategic compass, and the extent to which this is effective or not, that's another question. But we see also the European Commission taking a harder stance on security and intelligence considerations. The EU has briefings, monthly briefings, and this is public information. It's called the Security College, and it essentially calls upon, it informs all the commissioners and related security departments of the EU on contemporary security threats. So in a way, the EU is trying not just to accumulate soft power, but also to accumulate a better strategic sense of its own power and capabilities. Now, hard security considerations like defense, we're not there yet on the EU side either. So NATO at the moment complements the EU. So it doesn't necessarily complicate the role. I would sort of disagree with the fact that, with the consideration that it could complicate the role of EU decisions. I think by large, at the moment, it complements these decisions.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Constantine?
Sure, very quickly, so that we go to other things. Just how they could, how the states could use AI. There are many ways that the EU will be used and is being used. To what extent it depends on the capabilities of the state. For anything from data handling, data analysis, content analysis, sentiment analysis, all of these things, to big data surveillance, to geospatial intelligence, satellite images collection, and all of these things. These are issues that are and will be further integrating AI technology into their domain. So there's no doubt that this is happening. And just to give you an idea, in 2018, so we're talking about what 7-8 years ago, the U.S. Michalis might know this. The U.S. strategic documents were saying that by 2025, this year, AI should be fully integrated across all military sectors, and so that was something that they were seeing way before that compared to today. For the EU, I agree with Petros. I think that NATO EU discussion, it's not a question of complication. It's a question of how do we avoid duplication? How do we avoid the 3 Ds duplicate? What is it? Duplication. What are the other Ds that I forget? Anyway, so it's not a competition. more than anything else. But I will stand on my position that the EU has a long way to go until it becomes a real geopolitical actor, especially compared to the other China and the US. The regulation, just to add on what Petros said, it's very difficult to be achieved. Very difficult, extremely difficult. Even if the EU does it, China will not do it, the US will not do it. This will create gigantic implications for countries that have regulations as opposed to those who do not have regulations on AI. So I'm going to stop here so that we have more time for other questions.
Thank you, Konstantinos. We've got a question by Mohammed Mehdi Tarhuni. The question is, how can international law keep up with the speed of new weapon development like hypersonic missiles or underwater swarm drones?
Petro, you want to take this or shall I? Yeah, shall I? Yeah. Sure. I think that's a very good question. Well, the hypersonic missiles and underwater swarm drones is just the evolution of warfare, right? So it's not a question of law per se, in the sense that this has always been the struggle, right? To create better weapons than the opponent has defenses. The question when it comes to technology and disruptive technologies is that, and this is where I would agree with what Mohammed is probably alluding to, and he may correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, there is a problem that we are developing technology faster than we can regulate it or even control it, and this is a situation that many AI gurus are highlighting, that the technological arms race is pushing states to bring to the surface technologies that are not yet fully tested or vetted as they should be. And this creates many risks. And to the EU credit, it's trying to regulate this. To the EU's shortcoming, it's not sufficient.
Yeah.
Yes, if I may add, I mean, I am not a legal expert, but at the moment, we don't have any concrete laws governing hypersonic missiles or underwater swarm drones, but we do have existing frameworks. We do have, for example, of course, the Geneva Convention. From a humanitarian perspective, there are provisions in a way containing the use of any arms that will inflict unnecessarily harm, and in a way to protect civilians and non-combatants. But I think it is up to states themselves to effectively establish new regulation, revisit existing regulation, and come up again with arms control treaties to better regulate the newer technologically linked challenges to weapons such as hypersonic missiles and swarm drones. But yeah, other than that, I don't think we have, of course, any kind of law as such. Now, keeping up though with this speed of new weapons development is potentially we can start by revisiting such treaties that we have incorporated as states and see whether we can account for technologically advanced weapons as well.
If I may jump into this, regarding the weapon systems that Mohammed refers to, I agree with Konstantinos that they do not critically deviate from the existing legal framework that in contemporary international law, it has been built on the UN Charter and developed ever since with the Geneva Conventions and several other legal regimes that have been created after World War II. because they are weapon systems that do involve kinetic force, destructive force. Therefore, the prohibition of the use of armed force as a means of foreign policy has been in place since the Paris Agreement in 1928, and of course it has been reinforced by Article 2, paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. However, when it comes to the evolution of technology, there are fields in this evolution that cannot be covered by the contemporary legal framework. They are faster than the evolution of the legal framework that we have in the international society. For example, means of cyber warfare or other forms of disruptive technologies that can generate destruction of security means of an independent state without using kinetic force. The problem in this sense is that the international law is built on the assumption, on the principle, I would say, that any violation should be attributable, which means that the violator should be clearly identified. Otherwise, you cannot prove the existence of any violation. If we do have violations of the kind that Petros described in his presentation, or violations which are using highly computerized means that cannot be attributed, that cannot be traced, like hacking, for example, you do have a problem in embedding this kind of violations in the existing legal norms. We do have a debate, though, on whether we should incorporate these new developments in the existing legal framework, in the existing rules-based international order, or whether we should redesign the international order. And on the one hand, you have the United States and Europe taking the former perspective that we should use the existing legal framework to regulate these new developing threats to the international peace and security. And on the other hand, you do have China and Russia, which believe that we should redesign the international legal order. Of course, now we do have a third pillar in this debate, which is Donald Trump. So far, I have not heard or read any statement or any post in the social media by President Trump referring in any way to international law. Probably he's the first US president doing or refraining from doing so. Even George W. Bush, who illegally invaded Iraq, had made use of norms of international law to justify that invasion. Donald Trump does not do so. So I'm expecting to see the new U.S. National Security Strategy document to see whether something has changed regarding the approach of the United States on the international law. What do you think about another question? I'm asking now another question that I received. What do you think about the possible dangers of integrating artificial intelligence into defense technologies? I will make this question directly to Konstantinos because I know that he is very much interested in this field.
Yeah, I mean, both Petros and I, we did some work on this, and we had at the university
I'm leaving the last question for Petros. That's why
Yeah.
I am sharing the last two
Yeah.
questions to each one.
The blended intensive program that we did a few months ago with Petros and colleagues from Estonia and Italy, and this question was at the center. And of course, the question is, how do you keep what we call man in the loop, right? How do we maintain human decision making as we integrate AI into military technologies? So there's no clear answer to this, right? Everybody's saying we must keep the man in the loop, no doubt. Everybody agrees that ultimately humans must have the final decision. I don't think there's any doubt about that, what we want to do or what we would like to do. The big problem will come when essentially we have doubts whether or not the opponent is actually keeping a man in the loop. And by the way, when I say man, I mean a person, right? It's just an expression. I don't mean literally like gender. So this will become the big question, because if you believe your opponents are not doing it, which means what? It means that they will outthink you and outpace you if they leave it entirely up to AI compared to keeping a human in the loop. So as warfare changes and is more information driven, then what matters is the algorithmic speed and superior data processing. There's no doubt about that. This is where we're heading, this is where we are. And in terms of warfare, this reduces what we call the OADA, which is Observe, Orient, Decided, Act, which for military people, this would make sense because it becomes real time. So what do you have? You have decision-making superiority. What are the risks of that, to answer your question? Well, the faster AI-driven decisions, essentially, by definition, reduce human oversight. By definition. The speed of commands and decision-making also has a very interesting side effect, because it reduces the traditional deterrence norms and signaling. If everything becomes super fast, the signaling aspect, what do we understand, how do we understand what happened, will also change. And this would be very, very interesting to see how it will be regulated, not legally, but within the militaries. So what we observed, just to cut the very long story short, is that all these AI-enhanced early warning systems, which will be greatly improved, at the same time, they create risks that are both linked to, did we understand that correctly, the signaling part, but also accidental escalation. And I think this is something that we should keep in mind.
Thank you, Constantine. We have 2 more minutes. Therefore, I will ask the last question, and unfortunately, we don't have time to receive another question that came right now. This question is to Petros. How can international and regional alliances like NATO and the EU improve cooperation to counter hybrid threats in these strategically important waters? I guess he means the Eastern Mediterranean waters.
Thank you, Michal. I think it also extends not just to Eastern Mediterranean, but also to Black Sea and beyond, because there is already ongoing cooperation between NATO and the EU. There are actually windows linking also non-NATO or even non-EU countries for that matter. There are institutions such as the Hybrid Center of Excellence in Helsinki that actually enables both NATO and EU partners to discuss policy, receive training, and general awareness, include expert knowledge on how to tackle hybrid threats, not just in our region, but also beyond. We have also more advanced technological centers, such as the Cyber Cooperative Center of Cyber Defense Cooperative Center of Excellence in Estonia. That's a NATO institution, but given that it's also in an EU country, there are also events that actually bring EU and other countries together. Now, there are, of course, what I'm trying to say is that there are organs in place already, and the pieces of the puzzle, they fall in place, but sometimes they don't fit. And what do I mean by that is that these things, they're not, those things alone, they're not enough. We need to increase communication between not just regional alliances, but also trusted allies and partners beyond, outside these institutions. So states, sometimes they have to behave in a very selfish way. They can enact alliances and they can cooperate with countries that are not favorable to the rest. For example, I can bring the example of Cyprus, how Cyprus does not see an ally in Turkey, but other countries do see an ally in Turkey. And they cooperate with Turkey for different reasons. So other countries, by default, have to cooperate with others beyond, outside the alliance, outside NATO, to secure strategic priorities. And as such, I think we have to turn to security and intelligence agencies more often than not to actually inform our decision-making processes. And that's essentially the point of my presentation as well, to try and receive that hidden or secret knowledge in a way that enables us to better inform our decision-making process.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Let me apologize for not being able to ask the last questions that we have received because we have run out of time. We were trying to keep the form of these webinars as short, as compact as possible. It's part of the game. We want them to be as short as possible. They are tailor-made for people who are working, who don't have abundance of time at their disposal. I would like to thank Petros and Konstantinos for their very insightful presentations and thoughts that shared with us, and all the participants that honored us with their virtual presence. They will receive their certificates of attendance very soon. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to the personnel of the distance learning unit of the University of Nicosia for the great work that they have been doing in organizing and promoting these events. Thank you very much. We are also very close to finalize another webinar on the developments in the Middle East, but this will be in Greek. We will announce it very soon. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.